In the 1300s, Europe was undergoing seismic shifts. The Black Death had ravaged the population. Feudal systems were cracking. Trade routes were growing. Cities were rising in power. And peasants, once voiceless, were beginning to question their place in the hierarchy. The balance of power between kings, nobles, cities, and commoners was unstable. In the heart of this world, nestled among the dramatic peaks and verdant valleys of the Alps, small communities of free peasants, herders, and merchants in what is now central Switzerland were forging a new kind of society, one based not on nobility, but on mutual defense, shared responsibility, and sworn alliances. They were forming what would become the Swiss Confederacy. In 1291, the forest cantons of Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden swore an everlasting league to protect themselves against foreign domination, especially from the Habsburgs, who ruled neighboring Austria and had designs on controlling the Alpine passes. These passes weren't just scenic trails. They were vital trade routes linking Italy and Northern Europe. Control over them meant wealth and influence. The Swiss mountain communities, who lived simply but fiercely valued their freedom, had no interest in being pawns of a feudal overlord. Over the decades, their alliance expanded. Lucerne joined in 1332, Zurich in 1351, Glarus and Zug in 1352, and Bern in 1353. This growing confederation was a mix of rural cantons and wealthy towns, but all shared a determination to preserve their self-governance. They weren't a nation yet, they were still tied to the Holy Roman Empire, but they were thinking independently, and that independence was provocative. Enter Leopold III of Austria, a proud and ambitious member of the House of Habsburg. The Habsburgs had ruled parts of modern-day Switzerland for generations and considered it part of their rightful domain. They viewed the growing Swiss Confederacy as a rebellious nuisance, threatening Habsburg prestige and territorial claims. Lucerne's expansion in the mid-1380s was the last straw. When Lucerne absorbed nearby towns like Sempach, Entlebuch, and Willisau, Leopold saw a clear and present danger. These were once Habsburg vassals, and now they were joining a movement that directly challenged aristocratic control. Leopold called for war. He believed, like many nobles of his time, that a swift, brutal show of force would crush the Swiss and reassert noble dominance. Leopold's army was built on the chivalric ideals of medieval Europe. It was a feudal host, drawing on noble vassals from Austria, Tyrol, Swabia, and Alsace. These were knights, armored head to toe, mounted on powerful war horses, trained from birth in the arts of war. His forces may have numbered 4,000 to 6,000, including heavy cavalry, armored infantry, archers, crossbowmen, and also squires, servants, and camp followers. It was a pageant of power, a rolling court of banners, crests, polished steel, and noble lineage. The Swiss, in contrast, were citizen soldiers. They were free men, not conscripts or serfs. They came from farms, workshops, mountain villages, and city militias. They brought their own weapons, halberds, pikes, crossbows, and clubs. Few wore armor, but all wore determination. They were about 1,500 to 2,000 strong, mostly from Lucerne, Schwyz, Uri, and Unterwalden. The Swiss had no cavalry, few archers, and little in the way of siege or support units. What they had was unity, terrain knowledge, and fierce motivation to defend their homes. Leopold split his army into multiple columns to pressure the Confederacy on several fronts. His own column moved into the Lucerne region, aiming to reassert control over Sempach, which had only recently allied with Lucerne. The Swiss rapidly mobilized a force and marched to intercept. On July 9th, 1386, the two armies met near the town of Sempach, just northeast of Lake Sempach. It was an oppressively hot summer day. The sun beat down on the steel helmets and plate armor of the Austrian knights, baking them inside their mail. Horses panted. Crossbows were ready. The Swiss formed into dense columns, bristling with halberds and pikes, marching uphill. The Austrians occupied the high ground. They had the advantage of position and numbers. Victory seemed certain, but then came a critical error. Leopold, confident in his superior force, ordered his knights to dismount. Whether due to terrain, heat, or arrogance, they abandoned their horses and formed a compact infantry phalanx, a wall of shields and spears meant to crush the Swiss assault. It would prove to be a fatal mistake. The Swiss launched multiple assaults and were repelled each time. The Austrian line held, but they were slowing. The heat, the heavy gear, and the confined formation wore them down. According to later accounts, at this crucial moment, a knight named Arnold von Winkelried emerged from the Swiss ranks. Legend says he cried, "I will make a path for you." He ran toward the Austrian spears, gathered a bundle into his arms, and hurled himself onto them, creating a gap in the enemy line. The Swiss surged through the opening, screaming their battle cries, halberds swinging, breaking the cohesion of the Austrian formation. Winkelried was slain, but his sacrifice turned the tide. Whether Winkelried actually lived or not is still a mystery. He is part of the legend part of this story, because we aren't sure he was ever a real person or maybe even based on others. Now, with their formation broken and exhaustion setting in, the Austrian forces began to falter. The Swiss exploited every weakness, hacking their way into the heart of the enemy army. Duke Leopold III, surrounded by his retinue, fought valiantly, but was ultimately cut down. He was just 37 years old. Around him fell hundreds of Austrian nobles, counts, barons, knights, the elite of Central European chivalry. The once proud host crumbled into chaos. The Swiss did not pursue far. They had made their point. The Habsburg army lay broken on the field. Leopold's death was a crushing political defeat for the Habsburgs. So many noblemen perished that some families lost entire lines. It took years for Austria to recover. The Swiss, meanwhile, were ecstatic. They had struck down one of the most powerful men in Europe and his entire feudal host, not with castles or cavalry, but with courage and coordination. This wasn't just a battlefield win. It was a revolutionary moment. The Battle of Sempach became a foundational myth for Swiss identity. It embodied values that remain central to the Swiss character: independence, unity across cantons, sacrifice for the greater good, and equality before privilege. Arnold von Winkelried, whether myth or man, became a folk hero. Statues were built. Streets were named. His name became synonymous with ultimate patriotism. A battlefield chapel, the Schlachtkapelle, was erected at the site in the 15th century and remains a pilgrimage destination to this day. The names of fallen Swiss fighters are remembered in local tradition. Each year, reenactments, orations, and musical performances retell the story. The Swiss remember not just a battle, but a moment of national birth. The Battle of Sempach did not end Swiss struggles. The Habsburgs would continue to war with the Confederacy for another century. But it solidified the Swiss military reputation, inspired further alliances, and created a psychological turning point. From that moment forward, the world saw that citizen militias could defeat knightly armies. Local autonomy could challenge imperial power. A tiny landlocked people could shape their own destiny. The Swiss had taken their first bold step onto the stage of European history, not as subjects, but as a people determined to be free.